today we have Trent Kjell from ABT Water, who's going to talk to us about some trends in water meters and successfully installing water meters, both from physically installing them and also how to work with your residents on installing meters. And before we get started with Trent, I want to announce to people that a few dates, August 7th is the RV Mobile Home Park Hall of Fame dinner in Elkhart, Indiana. If you're interested in attending the dinner to be supportive of the people that will be inducted into the Hall of Fame, just Google RV Hall of Fame and the details for attending the dinner will come up. This year, a couple of the inductees are Spencer Rohn, who has made a business out of the rent-to-own practice of selling and renting mobile homes in the parks, and also Christine Lindsay, a vice president at United Mobile Home, the publicly traded REIT. So two very deserving members from the MH industry. Also, want to remind everybody that September 6th, 7th, and 8th are the dates for the International Roundtable, the George Allen Annual Roundtable. This year it will be held in Indianapolis. I'm going to be one of the presenters, and my topic will be preparing to sell a park. And George's events are always very worth attending. It's a great networking event. The final announcement is about the Owners Symposium on December 10th and 11th here in Cedar Rapids. And we'll be putting information on our website, but it's here in Cedar Rapids at the DoubleTree Hotel. We are going to have speakers on capital gains taxes, investing after sale proceeds after the sale, or planning for retirement if you own a park or if you sell a park in order to retire. And we'll also have a workshop for people who want to bring any of their financial statements so that you'll leave the symposium with a market value of your park. So I want to introduce our guest today. I'm very enthusiastic about having Trent Kjell from ABT Water talk to us. And I want to just, if I may, talk a little bit about Trent's background, because I have known Trent for almost as long as I've been in this business, which is over 20 years. And I've been a customer of Trent's for about that long also. And Trent has been on the forefront of water submetering for the mobile home parks. He also does water meters for other types of investment real estate, and he'll talk a little bit about that. But the way I came to know Trent was because years ago there was a bit of a trend of water costs from cities and municipalities increasing. And so park owners were trying to figure out how do you pass that ever increasing cost onto the tenant. And Trent will talk about some of the discoveries people made, good discoveries people made when they passed on the cost to the tenants. But Trent his business has grown by leaps and bounds. He has many customers from small properties to I know ELS, the publicly traded REIT, uses Trent and his service for some of their communities. So Trent has a very good reputation in the business. So, welcome, Trent.
Hello.
Well, Trent, let's start out with how did you get into this business?
Well, it's kind of a longer story, but I'll keep it short. I mean, basically, you can hear me okay, can't you?
Yes.
Okay, just wanted to make sure. Back 25 years ago, I was actually working in the municipal chemical business, selling water treatment to cities. And when I branched off from the company I was working for to start selling chemicals to non-municipals, which could be, a mobile home park with a well, or, a hospitality place that's on the edge of town. They've got their own well. There's places that needed the water treatment. And then a few years into doing that business, I took a phone call from someone in Wisconsin that had tried to submeter some things, and it didn't work out very well for him because the submetering company that had done the work for them was from down south. I want to say Georgia, and they came up to Wisconsin and put the meters in, but forgot about our cold weather. So they had a lot of freeze ups and issues with that when the cold weather came, and they called me and said, "What do you know about meters? And what would you suggest to keep these things from freezing in cold weather?" And that was kind of the start of getting into the submetering side of things, and eventually that took over as our primary revenue generator. The primary interest from manufactured housing became submetering as more and more people were looking into it and are looking into it as a means to offset that variable expense that they have for water and sewer.
Well, that's so really, so the upper Midwest cold weather is kind of what got you into the business, it sounds like.
Yep, that's exactly what happened.
Yeah. And so you did this assignment or this job, and then other people heard of it, or how did you actually start your company?
Yeah, well, basically we had already started ABT, and we were providing services for the Safe Drinking Water Act when that came out, and eventually trickled down to the smaller folks, such as a mobile home park that had their own well. They ended up having to do all the same testing that the big cities had to do, and there was a lot of confusion involved with that. So we stepped in. It was the first thing that I did here was to step in with the Wisconsin Association and say, hey, if there's anybody that needs help with this water testing stuff, we can draw the samples, we can make sure all the paperwork is submitted to the DNR properly. And that was where we initially started, was helping with the testing requirements that came down on everybody because of the Safe Drinking Water Act. So we started there, and then eventually took that phone call about the metering thing. So being as my background is in water treatment, when somebody calls me about submetering a facility, I'm going to ask them, about their water, what kind of water quality do they have? Because sometimes water quality that's poor can have a very detrimental effect on water meters.
Mm-hmm. I see. So some properties adapt better to the meters than others. Is that right?
Yeah, I would say. Yeah, I would say that there are certain instances, even up to current, where I had somebody relatively local to me down in Chicago that had called, and they have a park south of Chicago, and they wanted to submeter it, and I found out that the city is providing the water, but it has an ungodly amount of iron in it, and the city doesn't treat. And so I told that customer, I'm not going to do the submeters for you right now until we can either figure out how to treat the water or find a meter that's going to hold up those conditions. And so we're in a process of doing that right now. But it was bad enough in that case for me to say, don't meter it, because you'll just end up with a lot of problems very quickly because of how much iron is being, put into the system by the city water.
Some parks that can just can't be metered or shouldn't be metered.
I would say for the most part, most parks can be metered. And when you're looking at, when I look at the water quality side, the meters are designed to hold up under, some duress of poor water quality, because you're always going to have some. It doesn't matter whether you're a city service or a mobile home park or whatever. If you're the one supplying the water, you can have certain minerals that are a little higher than they should be, and the meters are designed to hold up under some of that condition. But the worse the conditions are, the quicker the meters will end up failing or having to be cleaned out, which is common when you have really poor water quality like that. South of Chicago, they're cleaning out their meters every 6 months. So I would look at that and try and give an honest assessment to a park owner. If I think there's anything along the lines where the water quality would be so detrimental, I'll just tell them, hey, we need to figure this out and figure out a different path. But I would say 98 to 99% of folks are going to be just fine. The water qualities won't be, that bad. In the case of a well, we could even recommend some treatment. It's a little harder to do that if they're connected to city water, because there's no facility there to be able to set up for treatment. So, but most city water is relatively good, and they're already metering, the city is, so they obviously don't want to have water quality that's going to screw their meters up if they can help it. For the case of the city south of Chicago, when I called and talked to them and said, why are you not treating this water? Because legally they're supposed to. They just said, we don't have the money. And that was the end of the story.
Wow.
No money, can't build a treatment plant. And so that's why they don't treat.
Do you think that's, so is that an isolated incident where they don't have the money, the city doesn't have the money to treat? Or what do you?
Yeah, I would say, from my perspective, it's fairly isolated. Most cities, are, if they know they've got poor water quality, they're probably already treating. They have, in the case of that city with high iron, they would put in like an iron filtration plant and try and filter the iron out to reduce it down to levels that are not going to be bad or hard on, the meters or cause staining, that kind of a thing. So I would say kind of rare to run across a city that just says, we're broke, we don't have any money, so that's why we can't treat. Because usually at the state level and the federal level, they're going to step in and push hard to make these guys put those treatments in because it's the law. So, I would say it's kind of rare, and that most cities have water that's sufficient and it isn't going to cause those kind of problems.
Well, we'll see what the future brings. I know in the state of Iowa, that's a huge issue at the state legislature and with the city of Des Moines is water quality, really all through the state, but especially in the city of Des Moines, and who's going to pay for it and where's the money coming from. And so far there's, this has been going on for a few years and there's not been any action taken. And part of it might be the money. In fact, probably most of the reason is the money that it would cost to improve the water quality.
Right.
And let's talk a minute about the consumption on the part of the consumers. It's probably pretty common knowledge, but just in case it isn't with our owners, I know years ago when I hired ABT to install meters in a small park that I owned, I was motivated by people that already had the meters saying, well, the water consumption from the tenants is going to drop at least 25% because now they're paying for the water that they use. And I remember one park owner said that he put in meters and his water dropped 50%. And he said that one of his tenants told him that they kept the water running during the day when they were at work so their pets could drink from the tap. And so that went away after the meters got installed. But tell us what you've seen, or what have your customers told you about the consumption?
I would say just about all of them have seen reductions in consumption after submetering, and that usually you start seeing that in the second and third month, after you've billed the first month, second month, and then as people get used to the idea, okay, we have a new bill to pay, and they start looking at their own consumption and knowing that they have control a little bit over, what this bill is going to be. Most people, will pay attention to that and reduce their consumption. I ran a set of numbers, several years back. And it was basically parks where we had gone in and sub-metered the facility for the first time, and then looked at the numbers, and the average decline in consumption was 32%. I want to say it was about 15 to 20 facilities that we were averaging those numbers out on. So 32% as an average is good. Obviously, some can be a little higher. I would say the ones that may realize the least gain would be like a retirement community, because the retirees are pretty good about paying attention. Although we've done those parks, and the problem in the retiree park could be they may not hear when a toilet is running or hear when it's refilling, and think they don't have an issue. So if they're aware of it, they probably would fix it. But a lot of times you're just not aware. So even when we do a retirement community, for the most part, everyone's using what they should. And you'll just have a handful where they've got 1 or 2 leaking toilets, or maybe something leaking under the home. And it's always those handful that really cause the entire park to go higher than they should be on those utility costs. And you don't know who it is until you put the meters in.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Let's talk about technology. I want to circle back to the consumer side of this, but I know that when I first got the meters, I don't think you had the radio reads, and now we are able to look at our meters, each home, each meter, 24/7, and you send us alerts. So if it looks like one of the homes is using more than they normally do, we're able to take a look and try to figure out what's going on, or talk to the resident. But so the technology has really changed, has it not?
It has changed quite a bit. When I first started, the high-tech equipment was touch reads with a handheld.
Oh,
and
I remember that. Yeah.
That was the next step past, the old visual read, where you would just write the reading down off of an outside dial. Those have been around for a long time. And then touch reading, I want to say, was probably early 80s, late 70s, early 80s is where that started coming into play. The radio stuff for sub-metering really didn't get viable until right around 2000, 2001, where we were able to set up fixed-base radio systems for a reasonable price tag, because prior to that, you were looking at $300, $400, $500 just for a radio, and nobody wanted to spend that kind of money. So as soon as the technology got affordable, we started installing the fixed-based radio systems, and even those have progressed, because in the early days of the radio systems, we were using phone lines and modems, and these days we do everything over the internet. So we'll install a system and basically plug in a receiver at a park office right into their internet, and it's sending us a stream of readings 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. We can monitor the stream of data. We're storing all that data, and then the reports that we do for folks that have those systems are updated twice daily, and they get alerts twice daily. So, when you compare that back to the old touch read days, where you would go out and read meters, you'd come back and do your billing routine. By the time you figure out somebody has used a boatload of water is when you see their bill and you go, oh my God, it's a $600, $700, $800 water and sewer bill. And that's the first time that you realize they have a problem, versus today, I can let you know they have a problem within 12 to 24 hours. You'll get an alert notice that there's something going on with the home. They're using too much water, and we can alert people and be very proactive, where a manager could call or leave a note on the door, knock on somebody's door, and say, you've got a problem, and if you don't fix it, you're going to end up with a $600 water bill. And that turns the park into an advocate versus being an adversary when you send out the $600 bill. So I like where technology has been able to take us, but it moves very quickly. And so I think a lot of people have a hard time with technology as far as when should I buy in, because there's always something newer and more nifty that is on the horizon. So, for our purposes, we try to stay on the cutting edge for things that are, new, but have been used enough to be viable and long enough to have, a good understanding of how they function. And I try to stay away from the bleeding edge where, they just don't have that kind of good experience and information. So, we try to track all the newest of the new and what are people trying to do. But ultimately, I'm not going to sell the newest of the new. If it just comes out, I'm going to put it in somewhere and test it for 6 months to a year to make sure it does what they, because every meter company is going to say they have the best things since sliced bread. But it doesn't always pan out that way.
Yeah, no, I think testing is definitely good before we start promoting it to the park owners. And when you were speaking, it reminded me, Trent, that as with most things that have to do with mobile home parks, we park owners don't do a good enough job of explaining or promoting the things that the park owners do for the residents, such as, and if you have, we're going to monitor your water, and if we think there's a problem, we're going to let you know. So that's probably something that we need to start, using that as a benefit.
Right. Well, in explaining the benefits to the consumer ahead of time it's going to help. I mean, you always have a few that are just not happy because they have a new bill to pay. You'll have some folks that think, gosh, if they're billing me for water and sewer now, maybe they should be giving me a credit back on the lot rent. And sometimes owners do, sometimes they don't. It just depends on each specific situation as to whether that's viable to offer some sort of a reduction in lot rent now that we're doing the new bills. I had one owner that did both. He raised his lot rent and he put in water meters. So I've kind of seen the gamut. I would say the vast majority of people don't offer a lot rent credit. They just start billing the new water and sewer bills. And the average that we see, kind of other than California, I would say the average is about $35 for water and sewer bill.
Wow, that's very reasonable.
Yep.
Yeah. And
California, by the way, they're somewhere around $150 a month on water and sewer bills.
Okay. And Trent, we'll do this at the end too, but tell our listeners your website, because Trent has a very comprehensive website that really does walk the park owner through how do you explain or how do you answer questions that your residents may have about the water meters. So what is your website, Trent?
The website is www.abtwater.com. And we did develop a set of videos on there. There's 5 one-minute long videos that kind of go through the process, talk about submetering, talk about billing, talk about data for the newer systems and how that operates. So they're condensed because nobody wants to watch 30-minute videos typically on the internet. So if you can put together a nice 60-second video that condenses all that information down, that's what we were trying to do, is give that really good basic understanding with those videos of the process, starting from the install all the way through the other end of it, where you end up doing billing and maintenance and that kind of stuff.
That's great. And over the years, I have encouraged, in my work as a broker, listing and selling mobile home parks, I have often or usually encouraged the park owner to install water meters before they sell, even if they're going to sell relatively soon, with the idea that they'll get, if they do that, their bottom line will be better and it will exceed the cost. What they will make on their sale will be far more than the cost of installing the meters. And I do get pushback from that. Owners say things like, well, I've never liked meters. there's a lot of hassle involved in owning, having the water meters, and they're expensive. What do you have to say about that?
For a lot of these folks, I would say it's kind of a necessary evil. Nobody buys a park intending to be a utility, and yet in a lot of cases you end up having to be a utility. At least you're providing similar services as to what a utility does, just out of basic necessity. Because if you do nothing, your costs are just going to keep going up and up and up until eventually your lot rent can't cover what it needs to. And if it is covering what it needs to, you're not competitive anymore with the other facilities that may be around you. Your lot rent's going to be, quite a bit higher. I've had experience with folks that have kind of gotten into that pickle where, the water and sewer is costing the facility so much, and then they look at the metering and go, well, we really can't afford to meter, and we'll either just raise lot rent, or I had a couple of parks down in southern Illinois where they decided to do RUBS, which is pretty common in the apartment business, but not so common in mobile. RUBS is basically an even division of the entire bill amongst your population. So everybody gets the same bill each month. And they tried to do that sort of allocation with their water and sewer billing from the city. And eventually both of those parks went back to the bank. And, when in discussion with the ownership during that process, they said, basically we should have metered, 3, 4, 5 years prior when we first started talking about it. And I, of course, was encouraging them, to meter, because it was going to ultimately give them the information to figure out how much is being wasted by the consumer versus how much is being wasted in leaks in your distribution. That's something that you don't know until the meters go in. You can kind of look at it. I mean, I can look at the numbers of overall consumption for a park and tell somebody this is how much you're over. But what I can't tell them is how much of that overage is going in the ground and how much is actually going through the homes as waste, like a leaking toilet. So, and until the meters go in, there's no way to delineate between where the waste, is happening. And in their case, they never did figure it out. And that was all in the face of the utility had already told them that their sewerage was going to triple over the next 3 years. And between the rates of their sewer going up, and, I kind of knew right in the beginning when I ran the numbers for them and said, you need to increase or do this RUBS, and you need to be about $60 to $70 a month for every homeowner in order to cover the bill they're getting from the city. They didn't want to do it. They said, that's too much. And I said, but that's what you need. And they decided they were going to bill like 40 or 45, and still they were losing $20 a month on every home in water and sewer.
Sure.
And it just in the end, and ultimately both parks went back to the bank because it just couldn't get that under control.
Yeah. And I think that's an excellent illustration. And one of the things that I've noticed, I don't know if this is a fact or not, but just an observation, is sometimes it seems that the smaller the municipality, the higher their rates are. And I'm thinking of a property that a park in a small town in Iowa has meters, and of course, I think the owners may have added them right after they bought it, and there was a lot of complaining from the tenants. But the thing is, the residents in town, even that had just a regular house and were paying their water bill, they were paying, single person, older person was paying $85 a month just on their water and sewer, not count, and then there were other charges too on the bill. So I think that just knowing what the local townspeople are paying, it's usually, even with the water meters, it's far less than because in a municipality they're passing along those leaks, that are in their own lines to the consumer.
Sure.
And probably park owners should be too, but I don't know that they are. And I think when you get the meters, one thing I've learned is I have a much higher level of accountability because I'm looking at that gap, and so we have we don't have a formal system. We probably should, but we call it always be looking for leaks. And
Right.
we are, it's been said that in today's world, people have their heads down because they're looking at their phones. We have our heads down looking for water leaks.
Mm-hmm.
And they're, my parks are older, and so they're just, we just have more leaks. And we have found a ton of leaks, and we fix them, and we just keep getting leaks. Do you think that's pretty common with an older park?
It is. It's very common for, as parks age up or out, or however you would want to say that, the infrastructure is going to, uh, become used up over time. And eventually what you have to look at is, what am I paying on the expensive repair on an annualized basis versus what would it cost to have a whole new system put in and amortized over, say, a 15 or 20-year period? Am I paying, about the same, or maybe actually paying less by putting the new system in versus the repairs I'm having to do? That's one way to look at it. So I've had parks where they will literally be repairing 3, 4, 5 leaks a month. And we start looking at the numbers, and the amortization of a new system is less costly, as long as you can get the financing, of course, because it's expensive to do. Not to mention, a pain in the rumpus for ownership and resident when you have to go in and start digging up water lines in the park. So it's something that can be quantified for sure, but it's still a hard decision to make because of how much disruption occurs when you have to plumb in a whole new water system.
Sure. And Trent, we're getting towards the end of our call, and so I wanted to ask you to tell our listeners, what is your geography? In other words,
basically,
yeah, go ahead.
I was going to say we traveled the lower 48, and of course, when we started out, we were Wisconsin and Midwestern, and eventually we started making our way further out. So we've been to Florida, Texas, Phoenix, California, East Coast, West Coast. So anywhere in the lower 48, we can get there to do installation work, inspections, audits if somebody's already metered and they're having issues where there's still some disparities, or maybe they've got meters that are aging out and they're 10 to 15 years old. And, we've audited properties like that and found enough problems just with the meters themselves where they've frozen and broken and aren't spinning, that kind of a thing, where the meters are not representing 100% of their consumption, of the water that's going through. And just by doing some fixing and repairing, in some cases, we can get them back up to acceptable levels. So, but yeah, we traveled the lower 48. We've done some work actually in the U.S. Virgin Islands. Had a job down there last year to do some upgrades for meters, upgrading them with radios. But yeah, pretty much we can go anywhere. And if I'm not licensed in an area, we're licensed in Wisconsin, Illinois, South Dakota, Michigan. But if we're not licensed, then we'll find a local plumber if we need to pull a permit.
Okay, and so if you get somebody decides that they want meters, is there a time of the year that's better than other times of the year to do it, or times that you absolutely won't, like when it's freezing out?
Generally, it's where wherever the park is located. So I really wouldn't want to do, say, Wisconsin, Minnesota, the Dakotas in December, January, maybe February, because the cold really slows you down. Especially if you get into sub-zero. And the same is true of like Phoenix in the summer. You get down to Phoenix and it's cranking up to 110 to 115 during the day. You're lucky to get 4 or 5 hours in before everything starts shutting down. So super hot weather can slow you down just as bad as super cold weather. So in the northern tier, I would say spring, summer, and then down like southwest or where it's hot, you're going to be opposite of that, where midsummer you're going to stay away, but the fall, the winter, and the spring are going to be the best time to install.
Okay, and I know your company has grown and you have crews, and I know some of the people that work for you, and I have nothing but good things to say about them. They really know what they're doing and can solve problems, answer questions, both for me as the park owner and also for the residents. But about how long does it take when you get the order before you're at the property installing the meters?
Generally, it's about a month. So when I get a signed contract and some down money and things are ready to go at that point, generally the longest thing to get, or what takes the most time to get, is the meters and radios. All the other peripherals, if we're doing some pipe replacement and insulating and things like that, or just your standard plumbing peripherals like elbows and nipples and ball valves, things like that, we can get pretty quickly. The meters and radios generally is going to be about a month before we actually receive them. So it'd be about a month before we'll have boots on the ground after we've got contracts and everything signed, because that's how long it takes in general to get the materials.
Great. So Trent, our time is up. We just have a couple minutes left. So
okay.
Tell people how they may reach you. Why don't you repeat your website, and if you don't mind, give your phone number and your email.
Sure. Website is www.abtwater.com. So you can go there, and there's all kinds of information on there, including the videos I talked about. Phone number here at ABT is also on the website, but it's 800-697-9096. So that'll call in, and each person around here has an extension. So my extension is 13. My sales guys, I believe, are 14 and 15 are their extensions. So they can certainly call in with questions and whatnot. And my email is Trent, T-R-E-N-T, at abtwater.com. And they can certainly email me questions, or if they are looking for information, happy to send them information on what they're looking for.
Well, that's great. Well, Trent, I want to thank you for being our guest today, and to tell our listeners that I've had a very positive experience with ABT Water in terms of just the actual meters and working with Trent, but also the savings and the tenants. Eventually, with the material that I've used that's on your website, has really helped to have the tenants understand that this is not a punishment, but it's the right thing to do to meter the water. Yep. So, well, thank you, Trent.
Sure. Well, I appreciate it, Joanne, and I'm sure we'll talk again soon.
Okay, take care.
Thanks.